reminds me of a quote you have right at the front of the report here from EY, talking about the 300 billion illicit global market moving into the regulated and taxable realm, over time. And, at Headset, like we project sales to be about, 35 billion in the legal market. So it's just a tenth of the illicit market. But you make a really good point here that it's, the illicit market, as far as we know, how big it is and all that, it's primarily dried flower, really not, these other formats that can get created, and not, other the ecosystem of services and innovation that can wrap around this industry as well. So I think the point you're probably making is 300 billion. It's a big number, but it's barely the number. The number is probably much higher.
Oh, it's an ingredient. So if 1.0 was Canadian cultivation and funded capacity, remember that? 2.0 is CPG, cannabis as an ingredient, and not just for recreational or vice or societal. The way most people would think of cannabis. You're talking about most of the cannabinoids in the cannabis plant are non-euphoric. They're all therapeutic, but most of them aren't going to get you high. They're all uniquely therapeutic, and they're going to be ingredients across a number of use cases and end products. Pet supplements, cosmetics and vanity, the hemp plant, ubiquitous as a crop across, biofuels, hempcrete, plastic composites. I mean, it's green. This is going to be a big thing. And that's, contemplating 300 billion of an ingredient. I think you can start to extrapolate what that's going to look like across the industry lines. And that's along with, I understand most people are thinking about, smoking, but, most people used to think about listening to music by vinyl records, right? This is going to be eating it, drinking it, rubbing it on, taking bubble baths in it, and it's going to be across a lot of different industries, and it's exciting, right? It got villainized. Most people who don't know the history about how this was weaponized as an immigration tool to stop Mexican immigrants. I mean, they've been using cannabis as a wellness and therapeutic supplement for centuries. 30,000 years they know of use, as 10,000 years as medicine, as wellness. They used to give it to babies, Eli Lilly, back in before they weaponized it. So this is the exception, not the rule, is my point. And as this moves back in, our generation just happened to be programmed. I mean, I got into this space after 9/11. I found myself smoking cannabis to sleep and for the anxiety. And I went to Dr. Julie Holland. I used to tell her how guilty I felt about it. And she said, "Why do you feel guilty?" I said, "Well, because it's bad. It's a gateway drug." And she opened my eyes to the science. And once I went down that rabbit hole, I've never looked back. And by the way, I'm no longer on that pharmaceutical poison anymore. And I'm much happier. My kids like me. I'm less moody for the most part, depending on what's going on, of course. But you get my point. So this is a category killer across pharma. They know it. And which is why they've spent billions and billions trying to repress it. But as the research starts to demonstrate the efficacious agility of 3.0, that's where this gets we at CB1 Cap, we put on the research, we started a research repository by indication for what the endocannabinoid system touches that regulates neurotransmissions. It's a big deal. And it's there's a lot of things on there. You're like, holy cow. So I won't get into that now, but it's worth looking at, because it's really, like I said, it's a rabbit hole for the intellectually curious. This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I happen to agree with that. It's interesting that you mentioned about the heritage of using cannabis compounds as part of a healing history. And in our investment in Mexico with a Mexican family-run company, the focus they have on the consumer wellness side is really about ancestral kind of healing formulations. That cannabis is just one of many key compounds of plants, of things that come out of the ground that are indigenous to Mexico. And that's what they're leaning on, is that it's really about this ancestral healing path. And it's very different from the way our healthcare exists today. And I think it's all about just having it as a part of your life rather than trying to isolate it into these different areas. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. When you start to think about it that way, then it just blows the roof off of all of the ways that cannabis exists across everything that we touch.
It's the late stage adopters that still think this is more likely to cause cancer than help solve for it. If you understand how it's an anti-inflammatory, how inflammation is disease manifests, this is actually helping to solve for the underlying condition. as opposed to being the Band-Aid. And like I said, it's a category killer across pharma. They know it. This has been a dirty little secret between the government and the drug lobby for a long time, but the cat's out of the bag, right? And by the way, like that's just why, like for the 1% of people you talk about who are really passionate about cannabis, they've seen the efficacy up close. They've seen, I know people who have gotten off of like seizure medication that was debilitating, and for cannabinoid, and it's not just it's not snake oil. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna have cannabis. It's part of a healthy diet, exercise, routine, right? It's about wellness, but it's a game changer. So all of that stuff, I think, as that comes through that clinical pipe, will illuminate the consumer curve. Right, all these people who are like, I'm not going to touch it, are going to come to it because they're going to learn that it's actually good for you. And that's all in front of us still.
Yeah. I just wanted to share, I saw this quote from Michael J. Fox a couple of weeks ago, and it really struck me. And it, just like when you have been a true believer in cannabis, but then it's always reaffirmed when you meet people whose lives are positively impacted by it. And he said, if there's anything that working with CBD oil has shown me, it's that there's always hope, even for the hopeless. And he's been living with Parkinson's for so long and has gone through so many, I mean, what he's done to raise awareness and funding for not just Parkinson's, but MS and other, and ALS and other areas of these diseases that are so painful for people to go through chronically and then in the end very severely. I think just that reinvigorates me when you can see somebody who's had that kind of exposure to so many resources and then to say something so positive about a cannabinoid. And right now I feel like for that whole thing, CBD is just the tip of the spear. So,
well, I mean, that's what GW found out. That's how I got into studying the science. But when they, only 4% of frontline for child, it's a rare childhood epileptic disorder, but only 4% of that treatment, is cannabis, like through the front door. This is all coming after they've tried everything else, nothing's worked, and they're like ready to give up, and they're finding cannabis as opposed to this being the lead punch. And that's what's got to change, because these are kids who are seizing like 300 times a day who are now living normal lives and are seizure free. Like, not all of them, but enough of them that they're there. And it's like, okay, let's think deeper. Okay, what's dementia? It's a degradation of the mind. What's THC do? Oh, it stimulates brain cell activity. Okay, well, let's go study that for a while. Right, let's go see where that way, and of course, they're finding things there. So, like I said, this efficacious agility, this notion that it's not just for this, that, or the other thing, for sleep. I mean, we talk about what Ben is doing with snoozeberries and with CBN, which is specific to sleep, as opposed to CBD, which is is going to stop you from obsessing. It's an I'm blanking on the word, antipsychotic. But yeah. CBN is specifically suited to help you sleep, and that's going to be a category killer for things like Ambien and the like. So there's just a lot to look forward to on that front.
Yeah, so much, the wellness, pain management, the medical side, and kind of in this report, it does talk about these innovation areas. And one of them is the endocannabinoid system research, right? Like the way we're all wired and how it's, how it affects us. It's still like early days, and there's probably so much yet to learn around this stuff. And that's just one example of an area of innovation. So it is one of the most exciting industries, and I think your story, Todd, is similar to everyone that I know that is pretty serious about this category. Is you kind of get involved for one reason or another, whatever it may be. Some exposure to it. For me, it was this emerging category that looked like it was growing quickly, and I wanted to get involved. And once you get involved and you actually start to learn about like the harms of prohibition, how we've been programmed in so many ways, all this, the benefits, you kind of really get this another level. It's not just about business opportunity at a certain point, right? It's about really changing things. Exactly. And like everyone says they want to be part of something, or we're going to change the world. And, everyone has an impact on the world in different ways, but this one is such a clear impact in so many ways. So, yeah, I think everyone.
you think about it, they first discovered the endocannabinoid system in the early 90s. I graduated Syracuse in 91. So like I came out of college and they found this thing. It was the most ubiquitous network of receptors in the human body. And oh, by the
Right.
way, it helps to regulate neurotransmissions. They figured out what this is, and they figured out that the endocannabinoid system is identical in action to how the cannabinoids in cannabis make you feel. So THC is actually like the runner's high. Most people used to think it was endorphins. Like we now know a runner's high is actually the same ECS triggering as if you smoke cannabis or ingest THC, I should say. And so like that was first discovered when we started CB1. We sat down with everybody we could. We sat down with the big pharma analysts at some banks, and they laughed us out of the room when we started talking about this, and 3 years later, 4 years later, the same analyst published a 100-page white paper on the exact same thing that we were talking about. That, the point is you don't know what you don't know. Medical schools didn't teach this for a long time, and certainly you couldn't
Right.
study the plant because it's Schedule 1, so you couldn't do the research. All of that happened overseas. So all of that is going to happen. It's going to happen much faster now that they're going to open up research, which is, again, going to illuminate the consumer curve. I keep talking about this part because I think a lot of people are waiting for 2.0 to unpack, the CPG story and the uplisting and all that. But that wellness piece is going to really be the baseline for, I think, the whole thesis going forward.
Listen to High Rise on all major streaming platforms and watch the visual on YouTube.